I'm sure we've all heard of the saying that Formula 1 is Ferrari and Ferrari is Formula 1. It is the only team that has competed in every single season of the Formula 1 World Championship since 1950, and the list of records that they currently hold could fill a book. The most races entered and started, the most poles, podiums and wins, and of course the all-important most amount of drivers and constructors titles as well. However, despite all of this history and success, Ferrari is also the ultimate pressure cooker and the epitome of trial by fire. Ferrari is to Formula 1 what the LA Lakers are to the NBA, what Manchester United are to the English Premier League. It's the iconic Formula 1 team that every driver wants to drive for and every driver wants to succeed and win championships for as well. Winning for Ferrari is like nothing else in Formula 1, but losing for Ferrari also comes with more pressure and criticism than at any other team. In this video, however, I want to talk about why some of the most iconic drivers who have won championships in other teams and have all of the talent in the world just couldn't win a championship at Ferrari. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about Alain Prost, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel, and what exactly went wrong for each of these drivers and how Ferrari themselves failed each of them in their own way. So let's jump in and begin with Alain Prost. Now, right from the off, I will say that the Prost-Ferrari dynamic, and in terms of what really went wrong, is easily the most complex situation out of the three by a country mile, because during the early 90s, the team still operated in a very old-fashioned style, and this was well before Jean Todt modernized and revolutionized the team into the modern outfit that we see today. Now, the story of Prost and Ferrari is a much deeper story than I'm going to cover in this video, but if you would be interested in seeing a dedicated video about a masterclass in team dysfunctionality that was the Ferrari team of the late 80s and early 90s, then drop a like on this video and let me know in the comments below. Now, out of the three, Alain Prost actually spent the least amount of time at Ferrari because he was only there for 2 years, but it's remarkable looking back at how quickly things actually went wrong. At the end of 1989, Prost had just won his third world title at McLaren after one of his two infamous crashes with his then teammate Ayrton Senna at Suzuka. Prost decided to leave McLaren at the end of that season, and in his first year for Ferrari with Nigel Mansell now as his teammate, he almost won the title in 1990 at the very first time of asking for Ferrari before the second of his now infamous crashes with Ayrton Senna at Suzuka, which automatically made Senna champion. Having said that, despite issues already building up in the background with Ferrari and especially with his then teammate Nigel Mansell, 1990 was a good year in which Prost and Ferrari narrowly missed out on the title, but still had success taking 5 wins and 9 podiums. And it's incredible to think that exactly a year later, Prost would be fired from the team before the final race of the 1991 season. Now, when it comes to why Prost was never able to win a title with Ferrari, to me it comes down to two main things: the lack of communication within the team and its drivers, and the lack of leadership both in terms of the team principle and the company itself. Now, many people think that the management of Ferrari now is bad, but it was nothing compared to back then. The biggest problem is that there was no real leader who could handle two alpha drivers like Prost and Mansell in 1990 when Ferrari were actually competitive and could have won the title. There was too much intra-team fighting between Ferrari, Prost and Mansell, which included things like swapping chassis and hiding setup changes, and unlike at McLaren with Ron Dennis, Alain Prost specifically said that Ferrari lacked a leader of men and someone who could control two great drivers. The media also played a massive part because back then the influence that the Italian media had over Ferrari and the people at Marranello was huge, and it was one of the biggest things that divided the team. Prost was often outspoken about the mess at Ferrari, and this is where he also fits into the equation because in terms of driving, you can't falter the professor as he was known back then. He stood up to the pressure and produced some great performances to come close to the title in 1990, and even when Ferrari dropped off massively falling behind McLaren and Williams in 1991, and with Prost now having a different teammate in Jean Alesi, Alain was still undoubtedly one of the absolute best drivers on the grid. However, the thing that even Prost admitted later on in life is that he was too honest and too often wore his heart on his sleeve about the issues at Ferrari. In Formula 1, a cruel double-edged sword is that although we do like to see drivers being truthful, when it comes to Ferrari, controlling your emotions in the media and handling things internally to protect the team's image most of the time is the best thing to do, and it's actually something that Seb was able to do quite well during his time, which we'll get to a little bit later. Inside of the team, it was chaos, and during a terrible season, being comfortably only the third best car on the field and having a winless season as well, Ferrari actually fired their team principal Cesar Fiorio. In the media, the blame was solely put on Prost's shoulders, that it was him who pushed Fiorio out of the team. But what gets even crazier is that during the 91 season, there were actual conversations and negotiations that took place to possibly make Alain Prost the sporting director at Ferrari, as well as have him as a driver, which just showed how divided and fractured the team was. The climax to everything, of course, was what happened at the Japanese Grand Prix at the end of the 1991 season. After the race, Alain Prost now infamously described driving the Ferrari by saying, "It was like a horrible truck to drive, no pleasure at all." Now, this is where history has actually been altered, because the reason why he said that the Ferrari drove like a truck was not because it wasn't a good car, but because during the race his shock absorbers had broken, and he was just describing how badly that affected the car's handling characteristics. The irony, of course, of Prost being fired by Ferrari turned out to be that Ferrari got even worse the following year in 1992, dropping down to 4th in the Constructors and only scoring 2 podiums all season long. And although Alain Prost had to take a sabbatical in 1992 as he couldn't find a team that was good enough and would be worth his time, he made a comeback in 1993, joining the Williams team, and in his comeback season he won his 4th driver's title for Williams, just solidifying his status as one of the greatest and most complete drivers of all time, before retiring at the end of that year. The lure of Ferrari is hard to resist for anyone, and in the case of Fernando Alonso and why he failed at the team, the expectations that he had never quite lived up to what Ferrari were actually able to produce. Now, in classic Fernando Alonso style, just the way he came into the team was surrounded in a little bit of controversy, as Kimi Räikkönen, who not only had a contract for 2010 but also won Ferrari's last driver's title in 2007, was actually bought out so that Fernando could come in early. Despite the fact that Massa had been at the team for 4 years and had fought for the title just 2 years earlier in 2008, Fernando was a different caliber of driver, and after the disappointment of missing out on the title by 1 point in 2007, and then the 2 mediocre years with Renault, from the very first day, he was the #1 driver, he was the team leader, and was more motivated than ever before to return to winning races and fighting for championships. I think out of the 3 drivers I've picked, I would actually say that Ferrari were probably most together during the Fernando Alonso years, and the way Stefano Domenicali ran the team was actually pretty good. He made the tough decisions, there's no doubt about it, and when push came to shove, Felipe had to take a few hits, like the team orders incident at Hockenheim in 2010, or even smaller things like having to take strategic grid penalties so that Alonso could move up the grid, like in USA 2012. It might seem harsh in retrospect, but at those points Felipe was not even close in the title fight, and at least the team fully backed their driver and their decisions to give Fernando the best opportunity to succeed, instead of sit on the fence, which actually makes it worse for both drivers. When it comes to Fernando himself, I mean, he was Fernando. He motivated the team in the best way possible by dragging everything and more out of the cars that he was driving, and in terms of the pressure of driving for Ferrari, in a really strange way, I think it almost made him drive better. I've always said that in my opinion, Fernando's greatest season in Formula 1, to me anyway, wasn't any of his title-winning years in 05 or 06, it was the 2012 season in which he dragged the third best car on the grid to a title decider. But at the same time, when things weren't going so well, Fernando was Fernando. I think looking back, although you could nitpick the team and say that Fernando sometimes showed his frustration and, like Alain Prost, maybe struggled to control his emotions, I've never been able to take myself away from the fact that the cars that Ferrari gave Fernando were just never good enough, and in terms of the constructors' titles, Fernando never once drove even the second fastest car on the field. I mean, in 2010, although the car was good, the Red Bull was still the outright best car on the grid, and the McLaren, if anything, was probably even better than the Ferrari. And what people forget is that although Seb won the third race of the season in Malaysia, he actually had two reliability problems in the first two races whilst comfortably leading both of them. So although the famous stat that gets thrown around is that in 2010, Seb never led the title until he won it in Abu Dhabi, in reality, Seb actually should have won the first three races of the 2010 season, and from there I don't think anyone would have actually caught him, looking at how mighty that car was in the hands of Seb, especially in qualifying. To me, in 2010 and especially in 2012, Fernando got lucky to capitalize on two crazy seasons where there were multiple teams and multiple drivers that were able to compete for wins, which meant more wins were being taken away from the likes of Seb and Red Bull, which I think made Ferrari look better than they actually were. When it comes to the wasted years in 2011 and 2013 where Ferrari were nowhere, unlike with Prost and Vettel, Ferrari never once finished higher than third in the constructors, as I said earlier, whilst Alonso was at the team. And yet despite all of this, when you look at where Fernando ended up in the championship in those 4 years before the hybrid era began in 2014, he finished second in the championship 3 times and fourth in the other. By the end of the 2013 season, and after 4 years of Ferrari under-delivering, things really started to fall apart, and the frustrated Fernando Alonso that we know started to show his head, and he began to be more critical and more vocal about the team, which by the way seems to be a pattern with great drivers coming towards the end of their time with Ferrari. And by the time it came to the new hybrid era in 2014, Ferrari went one worse, and instead of building a car that could barely compete for race wins, they delivered a car that could barely compete for podiums. By then Alonso had enough, and with Stefano Domenicali being fired by Ferrari and being replaced by Marco Mattiacci, who himself was fired less than 6 months later and replaced by Maurizio Arrivabene, the relationship had come to its end, and both Fernando and Ferrari needed a reset. What's crazy looking back at that 2014 season and Fernando's time at Ferrari in general is that there is not a single season where you can look back and say that Fernando under-delivered for Ferrari with what he was given. He had 2 solid teammates in Felipe Massa and then a returning world champion in Kimi Raikkonen, but despite driving frustrated and looking to get out of the team in 2014, Fernando still delivered 110% and was still demolishing teammates even back then, with Kimi scoring only 55 points and finishing down in 12th, whilst Fernando outscored Kimi by almost 3 times as much, scoring 161 points, finishing in 6th place and scoring only 2 podiums in his final season for Ferrari. The takeaway of this failure will always be that although the lure of Ferrari will always be there, it's often matched by their ability to produce subpar machinery that frustrates their drivers and starts a blame game within the team. When it comes to Seb and during his time at Ferrari, which was the longest out of the three, the one word that will forever crop up in my mind is pressure. For Seb, it always felt like the Ferrari move was so much more than just a fresh start after winning 4 world titles and then getting beaten by Ricciardo in 2014 at Red Bull. It was the opportunity to do what his childhood hero Michael Schumacher was able to do and win a championship or possibly multiple championships for the most famous team on the grid. So right from the off, the level of expectation and pressure that was on his shoulders, even from himself, was huge, and what we've seen from Seb during his time at Ferrari, and also in a way, retrospectively looking back at what he was like during his Red Bull days, is that unless he is the undisputed #1 driver, unless he's got a teammate who he's comfortable with that he can beat, and then most important of all, unless he's got a car that he is absolutely on top of, then Seb does have the ability and does tend to let his emotions boil over in the car, which can translate into mistakes on track. Now, as far as the team itself, it's impossible to ignore the shift between the Arriva-Bene and Raikkonen years and the Binotto and Leclerc years and what that did to Vettel's confidence and, in the end, his results on track. Now, just like with Prost and Alonso, yet again another team principal got fired, but what strikes me as different between the Seb situation is that when Nigel Mansell left the team and Jean Alesi came in and a team principal was fired, Prost was still the #1 at the team and was still driving to the best of his abilities. For Alonso, when Massa left and Raikkonen came in and again the team principal got fired, Alonso was still the outright #1, performing at his absolute best regardless of who they put up against him and regardless of how bad the team environment got. With Seb, the shift in culture, which can be attributed to many things like the death of Sergio Marchionne, the firing of Arriva-Bene and the arrival of a young Charles Leclerc, meant that Seb wasn't able to maintain that dominant control within the team and wasn't able to stay on top of his emotions in the car as the pressure began to build and as he could feel the team that he had built around him started to slip away as they began to lose confidence in him. The team itself and the management have to be also called into question because whilst the Binotto era on the Vettel side of the garage has been terrible to say the least, even in 2018 when Vettel had a car good enough to win the title, Maurizio Arriva-Bene didn't have the guts to fully back Vettel by using Raikkonen as the #2 driver on multiple occasions like in Hockenheim and Monza, and unlike with Domenicali using Massa, as I said earlier, the one thing Ferrari have lacked and still do in my opinion is a clear and commanding voice at the top of the team and someone who can manage 2 drivers in a title fight. To me, the story of Seb is the best example of when the pressure is just too much for a driver and when the management just doesn't know how to deal with difficult situations. I suppose to summarize this whole video, great drivers will continue to come to Ferrari because the chance to race for that famous Scuderia with that prancing horse, the Cavallino, on the steering wheel is like a drug that most drivers will never be able to resist, and returning the glory days to the most famous team and the most esteemed team on the grid will make anyone a legend forever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Ferrari themselves will always live up to the expectations, put their drivers in the best car possible and the best position possible to succeed, and learn from all of their mistakes that they have made over the years. So guys, there you go, that is my video on Ferrari. I hope you did enjoy it. I put a lot of research and work into this one, and to be honest, regardless of what you think about Ferrari, whether you love them or you hate them, they are just a team that are so interesting to talk about because of their rich history, and there are so many amazing moments to look back on, and I am sure that they have many more interesting days ahead. Anyway guys, I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, then don't forget to drop a like and smash that subscribe button. And of course, we are on the road to 100,000 subscribers, so hopefully we get there soon. And guys, I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.